desarrollo social, la familia, personas con discapacidades y juventud de San Vicente y las Granadinas.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General and your staff, colleague ministers, excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good evening. On behalf of the government and people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I extend gratitude to the government and people of Colombia for hosting the 39th regular session of the General Assembly. Your warmth and hospitality are unparalleled. In like manner, Mr. President, I wish to thank all member states for their overwhelming support to St. Vincent and the Grenadines in our bid for a non-permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council. On June 7, 2019, our nation, with 185 votes of 191, became the smallest ever to accede to such a position. Our government knew 10 years ago, when this bid was first conceived, that small size was no deterrent to this accession, and has proved today that small in size is no impediment to playing a major role in an international multilateral forum. Mr. President, the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines reposes its actions in the multilateral sphere on principled pragmatism. Our nation has no axis to grind, has no army, and is a friend of all, striving for a better world. Our narrative is unambiguous. Our actions and positions on the multilateral stage are equally unambiguous. They're completely transparent and remain ineradicable from the founding principles and precepts of international law. In short, Mr. President, at the United Nations and at the Organization of American States, St. Vincent and the Grenadines articulates a cohesive position which at all times adhered to the tenets and charters of the respective institutions. This is mature and pragmatic diplomacy. Mr. President, with respect, just as there are myriad threats to the existence of small island developing states, and I will elaborate on these shortly, there are many threats to this mature and pragmatic approach to diplomacy. In an organization which began on April 3, 2017, to dismantle the charter which established it by disregarding the rules of procedure and holding an illegal meeting of the Permanent Council, and which continued on April 9, 2019, this systematic dismantling, this time, not only of the charter, but also of the provisions of international law, St. Vincent and the Grenadines must insist on aligning itself not with the narrow self-interest of few who flout rules, regulations, and international law, but with the law itself. It is the law that protects us all, the mighty and the not so mighty. Mr. President, it is in a free-for-all space culled out and extended by these hegemonies which have economic might and other elements in their arsenal, where size is often the principal determinant of dominance and victory, that might is right. Mr. President, where there is a providence of those who are perceived to be small and lagging economically, how much do member states gain equality and parity of esteem? How can they be mighty also? How can their voices be heard? Mr. President, these unequivocal responses is this: within the provisions of the international law. St. Vincent and the Grenadines therefore decries the violation of the principles of the international law, a practice which threatens the integrity of the Organization of American States and violates its foundational principles as outlined in Chapter 2, Article 3A and B of the Charter, and I quote, "International law is a standard of conduct of states in their reciprocal relations. International order consists essentially of respect for the personality, sovereignty, and independence of states, and the faithful fulfillment of obligations derived from treaties and other sources of international law," end of quote. Mr. President, St. Vincent and the Grenadines also decries the fact that the Organization of American States has arrogated itself authority which is not vested in it by the Charter, by not recognizing the constitutionally elected government of a member state and by unseating its duly accredited representatives. Mr. President, I repeat, as it is especially germane today, the words of my colleague minister, the Honorable Camilo Gonsalves, who reminded this August Assembly last year, I quote, "The OAS Charter repeatedly establishes sovereignty, independence, and non-interference as bedrock principles of this organization. Article 19 of the Charter states, and I quote, "No state or group of states has the right to intervene directly or indirectly for any reason whatsoever in the internal or external affairs of any other state. The foregoing principle prohibits not only armed force, but also any other form of interference or attempted threat against the personality of the state or against its political, economic, and cultural elements." Similarly, Mr. President, Article 20 is explicit that states, "No state may use or encourage the use of coercive measures of an economic or political character in order to force the sovereign will of another state and obtain from it advantages of any kind." End of quote. Mr. President, the founding fathers of the Organization of American States 70 years ago in the post-war era were determined to ensure that the errors leading to the catastrophic world wars would not be repeated. How far have we come from the ideals enshrined in the Charter? Mr. President, the Organization of American States, its commissions, notably the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, the IAHCR, should be mindful to be objective in the approach to an analysis of the events in Nicaragua. The Government of Reconciliation and Unity in Nicaragua is engaged in a process for electoral reform and the restoration of stability. It has shown good faith in agreeing to have the Organization of American States mediator involved. The government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines therefore calls on those member states who are avidly seeking to interfere in the internal affairs of Nicaragua to cease and allow the process's decent time to take effect. Mr. President, threats. Let us continue to contextualize the matter of threats to our very existence. Those political threats to which I have referred above, combined with those in the financial and economic domains, such as sanctions, those associated with the loss of correspondent banking relations and de-risking, as well as those engendered by the effects of climate change, increase the vulnerability of small island developing states such as St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Mr. President, it is an undeniable fact that these threats touch and concern every area of our lives. The dangers posed by climate change to life, livelihood, and security can be tackled and mitigated in the OAS if only this body would see the importance of prioritizing these. In the same manner, Mr. President, that the pillar of human rights is heavily prioritized and funded, St. Vincent and the Grenadines recommends that the development pillar receive equal attention. Further, the security implications of climate change merit the urgent attention of all member states as well. It is undeniable that there is a link between environmental concerns and human rights. Let us protect both. In this hemispheric multilateral sphere, the economic development of small island developing states such as ours is practically crippled by the harsh regulatory frameworks which stymie our efforts at self-determination. The Organization of American States ought therefore to ensure that the concerns of all member states are addressed equally. Mr. President, in conclusion, allow me to state that it is only through collaboration and the recognition of the ideals of equity and equality within the frameworks of principled pragmatism that the Organization of American States can function effectively in this multilateral arena. I thank you for the courtesy of your attention.
Agradecemos al señor Ministro de Movilización Nacional, Desarrollo Social.